reconvened this incredible group band in the making, perhaps, to talk about scoring. So, is there a time in music, before the writing of music? Is notation a language? Is its grammar time? Is punctuation rhythm? What happened when artists started to score? Why would they? Do you use a pencil or a laptop? Was it true that Paul McCartney couldn't read music? So from right to left next to me, again, we have the pleasure of having Hans-Ulrich Obrist moderate this conversation. Hans, known to many, is the co-director of the Serpentine Gallery in London, and he has 2 recording devices next to him, which makes him a master recorder. Tarek Atoui, who we just heard earlier, is going to continue to elaborate on the theme of score. André Vida has been with the Global Art Forum all week, and he did a beautiful performance in DOHA, and in which he took the idea of scoring, not necessarily in a musical sense, but in the sense of scoring a surface, and then looked at the construction that was happening in DOHA, recorded all of this footage. He himself is a saxophonist interested in durational performance, and he took the footage and played it on the facade of the building while he performed just after dark. And then finally, we have new guests to the Global Art Forum. It's Tristan Bera on the far left, is an artist based in Paris. He works in literary and cinematic genres, and since 2010, he has collaborated with Dominique Gonzalez-Foerster, who is just to his right. And Dominique is an artist based in Paris and has exhibited in many institutions, including at DIA Art Foundation in New York, also in the Turbine Hall at Tate London, and in the 11th Documenta. So please welcome our incredible panel, and without any further ado, Hans.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. And it's a great pleasure to welcome here Tristan, Dominique, Tarek, and André for this panel on scoring. It will be sort of multi-layered because we're going to start actually with each of the speakers presenting their approaches to scoring. I'd like to preface our discussion with just a few preliminary comments on the idea of the score and scoring. I mean, all our panelists, and that's why we felt it's important to bring them here together, have experimented with all kinds of notion of post-planning conditions and open score, as we discussed before with Tarek. This whole idea also that the score actually writes itself whilst the piece is in progress. Tarek has done so in many of the projects we could just see earlier today. His amazing piece also in Documenta, which was a permanent evolution somehow. Dominique Gonzalez-Foerster and Tristan Bera, it really started all when Dominique with Tempo del Postino for the first time actually went into this whole idea of connecting to musical score, while actually before very often the score and the exhibition were a very big topic, and I think that's also something which we want to explore today, this whole idea how actually the score connects to exhibition making. And it was fascinating when we worked on Tempo del Postino. Dominique says that in the last year there has been actually less excitement for working together in museums because it's something we've experienced, our generation experienced too much. And so this whole desire for a new house and have a new chance to see leads us obviously to theaters and concert halls and all kinds of other contexts, which is very much the topic of today. And Dominique continues this exploration in collaboration with Tristan, such as for example in Arles, the project which the Luma Foundation with Philippe Pareno, Liam Gillick and the car group of Maya Hoffman brought together, and that was the 4th act actually in 5 parts, which Dominique and Tristan did. Also the Istanbul project, we're gonna hear much more about this later. André, as a composer and also musician, saxophone player, has explored so many different aspects as an artist of scoring. He collaborated recently with Jean-Baptiste Descabel and Jonah Friedman on a musical score for this architecture art collaboration. And he's been, it's actually still pending, but I think soon in the Guinness Book of Record, where he was permanently writing a score, one can say, by actually improvising with a saxophone in the Serpentine in Henri Sala's exhibition every single day the duration of the show from 10 o'clock in the morning to 6 p.m. Non-stop. It was a really heroic effort of a sort of non-stop kind of event. So we're going to hear from them all, I hope, about SCORE. We will then have a discussion, but a discussion, this is not a panel, because as was said in the introduction, maybe it's kind of a band in the making, because we will then actually have hopefully some experiments, and André brought an instrument. I don't want to reveal the surprise yet. It's not a saxophone, that's what I can say. It's something smaller, and with this saxophone we will then have experiments. But before that, and before I give the actually microphone to our first speaker, Dominique wanted to make a dédicace, to dedicate this panel to one of our heroes. Dominique.
In 2026, it will be the 100th anniversary of Georges Brecht. So in advance, we dedicate this special session to Georges Brecht, who's been maybe one of the most important composers, even if it's not yet completely known all over.
And that ties in beautifully, of course, also with the exhibition Notations in Movement, which John Cage did in '69 in New York, which was so important actually for the topic today, where you had not only musical scores, but you had also event scores of performance artists, and where this whole idea actually of the event score of the performance art and the musical notation came together. And that's something which we have also in the music context, for example, in Darmstadt, knowing these whole contributions to new music already in the 60s, where we can learn that actually notation of a text is actually a text and is not just an instruction. It includes signs, it includes interpretation, and this interpretation can be variable. And I suppose that's also something which connects all the speakers of today, this sort of whole notion of a variable. I mean, Tarek already spoke about this a lot, this whole variable of the interpretation. But Dominique, as you started, maybe it's good that you and Tristan begin by telling us about your scoring.
Before we present the Istanbul project, I think there has been a really interesting shift. The 90s have been very informed by all the cinema vocabulary, and the scenario was a main concept for exhibitions, for art pieces, videos, and the whole connection to cinema, including black box. This whole way to use cinema and to as a tool, as a device, as a vocabulary for art, slowly, I think, became a little bit less efficient, less important, and strangely, the notion of score took up again and became more important again. Don't you think, Hans, that there is a kind of shift like this from, and maybe it's maybe even if I think the relation to cinema and all these works connected to cinema, whether they take the narrative aspect, the visual, the scenario thing, maybe what is crucial in the notion of the score is the relation to time, and is the notion of a four-dimensional composition. Because I think when we talk about score, what is a word that is immediately behind is composition, like how to organize something or how to, and if a scenario is a way to bring a narrative in an exhibition or in an art piece, a score is surely a way to include time and the force several dimensions, but in a more, maybe in a more complex way, or in a similar way but less language based maybe. So what we want to present today with Tristan is a party, an event that took place last year in Istanbul at our beloved Proto Cinema run by Marie Spirito here in the audience. And I think Tristan will start the presentation.
Yeah, I will start with the starting point. So we've been invited in Istanbul by Marie Spirito to make a project, and in fact along the conversation something came up. It was the idea of what's the best spot in a city to. The idea was the subject, the topic of our conversation was the nightlife, in fact. And so more and more, Dominique and I, we thought about a new format, and so it became a party. But before that, we met Sylvia Couvali, the gallerist of Rodeo, who makes us think about Pascal Augier, the real heroine of the movie of Romer, and then came up a new idea that Romer, when he made this movie, The Full Moon Night, in fact, he never went to parties, and his movie is about the social life and the mundane life. And so he asked her heroine, the girl in the movie, to show him the best parties in town. But unfortunately, in '84, there was like a hole in the mundane life in Paris. There was no parties to go. So he decided for his shooting, he decided to make the best party of '84. And so I will show you just one excerpt. If it works. Sorry for this silence. So at last we were like Romer, so we didn't know about the nightlife in Istanbul, and so we tried to gather a lot of people to involve them in a party produced by Proto Cinema. So there's music and.
So the film is from '84, and the music is by Elie Jacquenot, and it's very much French new wave from that time. So played with one small organ synthesizer and one voice. Very minimal, very beautiful music, and in the so the one of the most beautiful scenes is this reconstructed party. Well, if it doesn't
work, it doesn't work. Okay. So in fact, this movie, this scene, was the starting point of our reflection for making a party, and then in fact the idea of the score is to me, because I don't read music, I don't know how to play an instrument, but I watch movies, and so movies were acting like scores for me. So I ask people, and sorry for this mess. So I asked people, and especially Sylvia Couvali, to reenact Pascal Augier in the Full Moon Nights. And so that's why the starting point of the project.
Okay, so in fact, in terms of score, there are 5 films. There is the Nuit de la Pleine Lune. There is a famous film by Buñuel, El Ángel Exterminador. Maybe you know it. In this film, it's a party which can't end, which is in a kind of endless repetition until the people from the party find the way out from the party through a repetition. So this was our, let's say, for the score. We have a kind of timeline, and this is the main film, and then inside we used characters from the different films appearing, reappearing, repeating hours. And now, just to show you a few pictures from the party. If I can access, maybe you this is a very difficult instrument to play. Sorry.
I will play it. So
Yeah.
play the instrument.
Yeah, maybe we go to images. So based on 5 films and the character from these films and the music from these films, a night of a full moon night in Istanbul, and yeah, you can go through the pictures. So all the characters from the films, not played but put in presence, and repeating certain actions. This is the piano part from the Buñuel. She's Ingrid Bergman. So 4 films playing parallel. She's from the party.
It was a party inspired by movie scenes with parties.
So the party is of course a film in the party, and so at maybe we can see this girl from the party. Go a little further. Well, we go step by step. We see all the characters. Maybe we have one is here maybe. We also had the live band playing some of the music, because in Notorious, which is one of the influences, there is music played live. A telephone ringing in the party. And at one point, a French girl, Michelle Monet, that's her, sings a song. And we wanted to play that song just to finish this difficult description. Can we go back to films? If it works. Otherwise, we'll have to find another way. Now you have to go down to the... Okay, down. Back to films. Then down.
Yes.
Here, yeah. Volume up. Are we lucky? So she was singing the song.
If we are wise, we're not expecting a rainbow.
Nothing to lose.
Colored skies, not wide awake. Nothing to lose. It might be fun. No talk of spending lifetimes in the sun. Although we met, both you
Thank you so much, and there could not be a better transition now to André and his presentation of SCAR, which has already started, as you could see. Before that, I would like us to also salute the great Ari Benjamin Myers, because obviously, as said before, André has collaborated a lot with Henri Sala. So did Ari Benjamin Myers, and Ari is opening an exhibition in Berlin. He's here by telepathy, and he, as a composer, has been very involved in collaborating with Henri as well, in collaborating with Tristan and Dominique, who always work, of course, with the composer in these, scoring endeavors. And anyway, this is just to also encourage you to really follow Ari Benjamin Myers' work and maybe see his exhibition in Berlin. Now a warm welcome to André and his scores.
Thank you. Well, as you can tell from my flute playing, I'm a saxophonist. So I have dealt with scores as an interpreter and also as someone who's interested in organizing experiences for other musicians. And being that the saxophone is an improvised instrument, I've had to deal with a similar topic of what you were talking about, of kind of reconstructing scenarios for an oral tradition. In America, or in my experience of the saxophone, we have this idea of jazz, which is a culture that in many ways has died. And so for a saxophonist and a composer who's interested in both improvisation and structure, I found myself having to come up with a new way of approaching this idea of a visceral, living music. And so scores were my way of doing that. This is an early piece of mine where I'm kind of delving into this area of graphic notation. Now, there are all kinds of ways of interpreting these, and that's part of the point, to kind of leave it open. So you have intervallic ideas up here. Boom, 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 ba ba boop ba 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 beep. And I always tried to put things like that in, and I'll just go through a couple explorations of this. Because I have spent quite a bit of time thinking about it. In this, you see there's a kind of figure. So sometimes I was trying to involve some kind of a comic book-like narrative, or something that an improviser could come and approach, come up with a narrative interpretation of. This is another piece. Has a kind of mythic theme. You could say it's kind of like an Icarus story you could take from this and interpret. I just keep going. And so you see all of these permutations suddenly become infinite. And not only infinite in creating them, but also infinite in interpreting them. And I think in scoring, this is one of the serious conflicts, one of the kind of, as Cardew put it, viruses that we have to deal with in the kind of contemporary age. Of course, he called it a virus in the 70s, and since then the virus has expanded and evolved in many ways. So I kind of lost my interest in this area for a while, and I moved on to working with restrictive outfits. As an improviser, you're always dealing with your body, and so I worked with some designers to make these restrictive outfits, tying together violinists so that the way that they, when one arm bows, it pulls the other's arm also. And this has been a way that I have thought about scoring. In a sense, scoring is designing costumes or scenarios of restriction, very much tied to the kind of issue of improvisation. Improvisation is not really so fun when it comes out of this illusion of freedom. It's actually much more interesting when it's based on restriction. Okay, that's not going anywhere. And you know, I played around with this, and then eventually I came back to the scores. I had the kind of, I'm sorry, this is going strangely. I found another way of approaching these visual languages, which was to animate them. And in doing so, I discovered a method for exploring notation, not as something static, but as something that someone can interact with their shadow. So I installed these in different scenarios, and I'll just give you a kind of sense of how I might interpret something like this. Is just in a, thank you. This became a way for me to access the body and to think about motion and how it's possible to frame a structure that's open, but also directly accessing the kind of visceral elements of improvisation. And I'll just show you something I recently did because I'm slightly out of breath. I get very emotional when I perform.
So that's the collaboration with Yona Friedman, the great architect and urbanist, who's obviously relevant for this topic of what Tarek was also speaking about, you know, because he always wrote his architectural scores, urbanistic scores, whilst doing them. He refuses anything such as the master plan.
Yeah, and so I met Jean-Baptiste, who was working on this project and looking for music for the finissage. And I proposed to him that I wanted to, because as you see, this visual material looks a lot like my earlier scores. So when I saw it, I was really inspired. And I suggested to approach this material using light and paper as a means to create a kind of temporal score. So let's see. Here you have the actual score. I guess this also, it's immediately you see this, there's like the problematic, how do you interpret this? In our situation, because we had different colored lights, we had different time frames. So we could come up with different ways to kind of interact with the environment of this. And the shadows that the paper captured was kind of our score. So not only was this kind of like a moving and open-ended possibility to interpret things, but but yeah, it was. Well, I guess I should just say also the way we had to come up with solutions for how to deal with this as a structure. So we came up with a poetic concept, which was that we would do a duo. It was me and a trombonist, where neither of us would ever play at the same time. So there was this kind of boundary between us. I'm sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought, so I'll just hand it over.
No, it's perfect, André.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. And we now go from your scores, to Tarek's scores. And actually, Tarek brought us a score, which I think we can distribute now.
That would be great.
So I don't know where the scores are, if we might have these boxes, because Tarek brought a score for each of you. And so then we can look at it, and maybe, it's interesting, there are lots of questions, Tarek. You already addressed many of the issues, in your previous talk, but obviously,
Yes.
One of the things which I was very interested in is how this now evolves, because in the Serpentine piece was an incredibly long durational piece, but now
Yes.
you're working for Sharjah actually on a 2 months piece.
2 months
I
long.
understood it's 2 years, but that's almost like La Monte Young, so it's 2 months for the moment. So the piece is getting longer, and I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit what this extreme duration kind of means for the scores.
Yes. Well, this work on extreme duration became important to me because, as I was saying, like this idea of writing a score and learning from it while it unfolds, and like really triggering something or creating a situation that could be sonic or like performative, and then letting it guide you in a way, and making it really at the heart of the compositional process is something that interests me. And the relationship to duration here makes sense. Like a period of 2 months is a period where you have enough time for things to unfold from within or from inside the situation you have created. And then you learn from it and you write in relation to it, and you like take other people on board with you through it, and it becomes like a collective journey actually. And this is where like a 2 month period is meaningful to me, or like even longer durations where I believe, like, I don't know, André, like when you write a score, you always have this frustration of like saying when it's finished, you want to revisit it, or you are always unsatisfied with what is happening in a way. And things pretty much came to me from this actually. I wanted to have a certain relationship to writing where things would have an open end, where I would be learning from things and finishing the piece while it's happening, and not finding myself with a restrictive form or something that is closed and fixed as such, and then regretting, because I believe we are always in the process of learning.
But there is this tension which is interesting, and often when one speaks to composers, and I made all these interviews with composers from Kurtak to Xenakis before he died, to Boulez, and one of the things which often comes to surface is this sort of tension they mention in the idea of the score between the inflexibility of the score as a set of instruction and then the flexibility of interpretation that it allows us.
Yes.
Can you talk about this tension and how it articulates itself in such a score everybody is now looking at?
Well, in a score like this one, actually, this is like, for me, what we have here is a macro score. And within it, there are micro movements that leave lots of space for interpretation. Because, for example, a commission to Hassan Khan is an interpretation, can be seen like in a way as something of the kind. The idea of inviting drummers and like putting them in a given context and then having them propose or suggest the way of playing is also a matter of interpretation. And if you are looking at this score, you can see that at some point it's a 4-movement composition, and the third movement of it is actually called taset, and it's a silent section where all of a sudden no sound is produced. It's working with deaf people on their relation and understanding of sound and their way of hearing sound, and it's a situation that will allow us to generate or to produce other things. But I don't know at all what is going to happen on this workshop, where it's not musicians who are there all of a sudden, it's neuroscientists and designers and physicists and architects. And for me, these people with their different profiles are entirely part of the score, and they are as equal as the musicians or the performers. So that's the lines of tensions are in this, like, is really being aware, or like staying as a composer in a like observing, sensing, feeling the environment, feeling the situations you have created in order to always propose a development or accompany something you have triggered. And really, for me, this is the tension in such process.
Now, one other thing I was curious is, the question of technology, and particularly also digital technology. What kind of impact digital technology currently is having on the production of musical scores, and particularly of your own scores, because obviously there are many links in what Tristan, Dominique, André, and you said to Darmstadt. There are many links to to John Cage. There are many links to open scores.
Yes.
Yet we're living in a very, very different moment. We're living in the digital age, and that's kind of wondering. I mean, it's a question I'm going to ask everybody later, but maybe we can start with you.
Well, for me already, if you look at this, like this is something I kind of wrote and designed, although I'm not a designer. And honestly, this is made with a software for programming sound. This is made with Max MSP. It's not a design, InDesign or anything. And the thinking in it is modular. Like really, it is coming from my way of dealing with programming languages and building software. So this whole thing of articulating sections and how you create situations that can be re-articulated and reassembled come really from a different, from a digital aesthetic and from method of programming and like these self-made project-specific software and like this approach that André as well, like you also have it. So that's been a great influence on me, how I perceive collectiveness, how I perceive duration, and how I perceive articulation of time.
Another question maybe about the sort of question of cosmopolitanism and then also connection to sort of origin or belonging. And one of the things, I mean, something we discussed also a lot when you did your London performance. You mentioned in your speech this sort of whole connection to and a resistance, for example, to ska, in the Arabic world, and it's obviously a very local sort of resistance to this sort of maybe Western form of the ska. But yet obviously the question also how one sort of negotiates the local and the global, and can there be such a thing as a cosmopolitan ska, or can there be what they do at Glissant calls a ska of mondialité? I'm very curious about that.
Oh wow, that's a very tough question. Well, I think, like, okay, in today's world, like we were discussing this also a little bit yesterday with André, we are articulating like a series of heritages. Like the one coming from classical Arabic music is one with a series of teachings and modes of writing, improvising and such. But we are also dealing with the heritage of graphic scores and all the work of Cardew and the Fluxus movement and the things that we are also studied and come from. We are dealing with the system of notation of classical music and different systems of notation from different cultures. And we are also dealing with orality, and we are dealing with our presence as human being at the time now as people coming from performance. And it's actually the score for me now is articulating all of these components in one. And it's really about how do we communicate with the outside world, whether with the performers or the musicians we are commissioning, or with the audience, or even with ourselves and like the situations we create. And it brings us back maybe to a very simple observation here. It's really about individual expression, and it's really about going as much as deep as possible towards the fields we decide to look into or to study, and really out of them work into something. It could be global or not, I don't know, but it's really going in depth towards the maximum clarity in specifying an intention or creating the space we want for our personal expressions.
Wonderful, and as we have so much more to do in the remaining 20 minutes, because there's going to be more experiments with scoring and with the four of you and with André's instrument, but before that maybe it's a moment to open it and to get also André, Dominique and Tristan's kind of view on this aspect of the digital, for example, and also the sort of negotiation between the local and the global in relation to scores. Or anything else you really want to react to, no?
It kind of is right in line with the piece that I just made for the Global Art Forum in Doha. I made an interactive piece. On the issue of scoring, I was thinking of scoring in terms of the word, to score, as in to cut or to kind of make an imprint onto something. And so I decided that I would take video footage of Doha and so just one second. Video footage of Doha, and then I came up with a way of imprinting my instrument onto the landscape. Because Doha is constantly under construction, and there's a very kind of removed sense of space. As you can see, there's a fingering chart in the background. And so this kind of mirrors the saxophone. And these moving cranes, each machinery has its own kind of timing. And I find this really interesting that we can kind of access this through video and find a way to approach scoring. I'm just going to let it play if you want to respond also.
They respond, continue the conversation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, in fact, there is one word we haven't said yet since we started the conversation, but it's opera, and I think somehow there is something behind all of this, which is maybe a possibility to imagine what opera in the sense of a work that includes everything, stage, music, visual. If there is a possibility for an open opera in the I like the word, in the 21st century. And there is a great, very small book by Mehdi Belhaj Kassem, which came out recently. He wrote huge philosophy books, but this is just a series of texts where he's writing about opera DVDs. So he says he has never been to see an opera for real, but he just knows opera from DVDs. And in fact, how cinema stole the idea of music from opera, and how opera is primer to. And I have the feeling that in all these experiments we're doing, there is a kind of attempt to something that has a connection with opera, in the sense of, I don't know if you feel it like this, or if it's a word you like or not, or.
Well, it's a word I like a lot, and actually it's very nice that you mentioned opera, because while walking here in the art fair, actually I found the score, and for me it was like another form of opera, and it answers very nicely this question that SG and Shumon had, like what happened when artists started to score and why. It's in the whole A. It's an opera of bird sounds, and it's near A27. And if you go there, you will see a score of birds. And if you know how to read frequencies and like spectrums, you will really start to hear an opera in your head. It's like tens of bird sounds, all layered in a very beautiful visual score. It's super visual, but at the same time, it's very sonic, and it's really made me question like the meaning of opera today, because all of a sudden I'm looking at this, and you start to see all this landscape unfolding like as a very random, chaotic bird soundscape. And I really advise you to go see it. It really echoes and reflects what you were saying on opera, I think. This makes.
And that would lead us to a next panel, because we could do a whole next panel, and hopefully going to continue this in other cities about the whole idea of the opera and the Gesamtkunstwerk and how it connects to that. But as we are, I think, short of time, we should now move to the next stage, which is this wonderful idea to actually conclude it with these two experiments, where basically I think first Tristan and Dominique will think about maybe a score for André, or the other way around, and I think. That was also the idea.
I think it's the other way around. Unless
either way, it's an improvisation.
You still had something to say, maybe about. I wanted to say, because the way we described the party in Istanbul it was difficult. We should have brought the timeline and the score. So very sorry for that. But we were also thinking to have a similar. We were also trying to imagine something similar for here, so connecting film spaces, hotel rooms, but still in the making. So should we proceed?
Yeah. It's just a little experiment. I appreciate you checking this out. I'm making a piece for 12 saxophones, and I decided my approach to the piece is a kind of interface in the end, and I will show you how it works. And if you have any suggestions for me, I would be grateful, maybe afterwards. So because it's for 12 saxophones, I'm dividing them 6 and 6, and hold it right there. One saxophonist will play the other saxophonist, and the way that they will do it is to have the fingers on the arms, and they will blow in the back of the head of the saxophonist. And so, you know, it's just a little thing I'm thinking about. If anyone has any ideas, I would be grateful for feedback on that.
Yeah, and that feedback, obviously, we have to do it in the coffee break, because as Schumann tells me, there is an emergency of schedule. So that leads us now to the last point, where actually I had understood that Tarek will now interact with André, and then I think, how will it work? The 2 years or the 2 months will become 3 minutes.
Exactly. So it's the score that was here and that you have, all of you. Can I see it? You have it. You have it here. It's this one. And when I was writing it for 2 months, I was always I was wondering what would it give, like, to play it in a very condensed period of time. And I asked André if he could give me an interpretation of the 2-month score in 3 minutes. And this is what he will try to do now. So this is the whole Sharjah Biennial now in 2 minutes.
Thank you so much to Tristan